Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to talk a little bit about Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, a man who I think is completely and utterly out of his depth, who has no idea what he's doing, who is completely and utterly out of touch, a man who is weak, a man who has virtually no charm, a man who'd be much better off, frankly, in an office looking at spreadsheets, not somebody to run a country. The man has no gravitas. He's terrified of everybody. He's frightened of his backbenchers. He's terrified of the Home Secretary. He's frightened of the newspapers. He's frightened of everybody. And right now we desperately need some really strong, powerful leadership. Sunak, he's got nothing to crow about. You know, after 13 years, we know now we're approaching an election. Within the next 15 months there's going to be an election. And it's a time when politicians will start, or already started, electioneering, looking at how they can persuade the electorate to vote for them next time. And bizarrely, after 13 years, the Tories have absolutely nothing whatsoever that they can claim credit for. Nothing is better. There is nothing better now than was 13 years ago. Everything is worse, and we've got so many problems. I'm going to list them in a moment, some of them. And so Sunak knows he's got nothing to say, look, we've done this, we've done that, we've done the other, vote for us. So all he can do is attack the Labour Party. And that clearly is now the Tory strategy, just attack Labour. You know, if Labour in power, they would do this. If Labour in power, they would do that. And they're quite prepared to be dishonest about it. And it was because of a particular tweet that I decided that I'd just had enough of Sunak, and I was quite happy to openly call him pathetic. I think the man is pathetic, pitiful little wimp, and I really have no time for him because of this tweet above everything else. And I'll read the tweet to you. He did get a lot of criticism over this tweet. An awful lot of people were very unhappy about it. What he said was this: the Labour Party, a subset of lawyers, criminal gangs, are all on the same side, propping up a system of exploitation that profits from getting people into the UK illegally. What he's saying there is that Labour and the criminal gangs, they're all on the same side. They all want to beat him and get people into the country illegally. And it's again, it's this desperate strategy, because what they want to do now is to whip up as much hatred of asylum seekers as possible. It's worked in the past, and they're going to keep doing it. And you can see, I'll talk about it in a moment, about how that's their strategy. And in terms of how weak this miserable little man is, you look at the thing with Farage and his bank account. Now, this is not an affair for a Prime Minister or a Home Secretary to be talking about. Not a Home Secretary, a Chancellor rather. But both of them, Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, both came out in support of Farage, because they're worried, you see, that a lot of voters might still like Farage. And if the government would go against him, or would have supported the bank against Farage, they might have lost votes there. Say anything to hang on to these right-wing extremists, and to whip up as much dislike of foreigners as possible. And to show just how sort of weak and flimsy he is, there was the Uxbridge by-election, wasn't there, where the Tories surprisingly won by 495 votes, and it was generally agreed by everybody it was because of the ultra-low emission zone, which Sadiq Khan is bringing in next month. And clearly a lot of people in Uxbridge were unhappy about it and voted Tory because of it. Now, I don't want to start discussing the ULEZ right now, but it did seem that it was slightly unfair to quite a lot of people. It was only a minority of constituents who were affected, but it seemed a little bit unfair to them. But nonetheless, what they've seen is, and Stam's the same, they've seen that people in Uxbridge, they didn't want this ULEZ, which is a measure aimed towards reducing emissions and so on. So they both flipped. on the front of the Sunday Times, 3 days after the election, headline, right next to a huge picture of the burning in Greece, a big picture with this orange sky and all these people running away from the flames. Right next to it, major highline on the Sunday Times, Khan, that's Sadiq Khan, to rethink ULEZ after call from Starmer. But Starmer said, if it's a question of votes, you've got to think again. In fact, Khan is going to go ahead with it anyway. Monday, on the Times front page, exactly the same photograph, right beside it, main headline, Tory retreat from green policies to woo voters. See there again. Sunak says, we lost a few votes. We only just won Uxbridge because of the people were worried about ULEZ. Therefore, we must change our policies and to help with global warming. So you kind of think you're living in a crazy country, that things are so bad and so mad, and what really matters, global warming above everything else. I'm going to say very little about that because I know nobody wants to hear about it, but nobody's really interested. There are more important things to worry about. And I just made a little list here this morning of things that are going wrong at the moment or have gone wrong. The economy is doing really badly. So many firms are closing and are going to close because people haven't got any much money now. People have got so much less money to spend, so businesses depend on particularly on discretionary spending, are doing very badly. So the pubs, and we've seen pubs and restaurants all closing, and so many shops are closing, so many businesses are going down, so many businesses are struggling. We've got inward investment has collapsed because nobody wants to come and invest in the UK because it's a difficult country to deal in. Whenever you come to export, you've always got complications trying to deal with the EU because of Brexit. We've got all these strikes. Whenever it's not doctors, it's train drivers, it's something else. And that seems to be dragging on, and that's a big damage to the economy. We're famous for having very low productivity. We have the highest taxes we're paying now since before the 1950s, the highest taxes, 70 years. Highest interest rates since the 1970s. It means that lots and lots of people are going to find they can't pay their mortgages. There's lots of repossessions. Property prices are almost certainly going to collapse, house prices. We've got the high cost of living, and that's going to go on. I mean, you look at food prices, and as I said many times before, we're producing less food for European food producers. We're not a very attractive market because it's just too complicated to come here. And our exports to the EU have collapsed. We're exporting so much less to the EU because it's just too much bother, because importers in the EU just don't want the paperwork. They don't want the hassle if they can buy elsewhere. Record government borrowing. You see, because the economy's not doing so well, the government's having to borrow. And listen to this. This is Fitch, which is one of the big credit rating agencies, the international ones. It says here, the UK will spend 110 billion on debt interest in 2023, according to credit rating agency Fitch. At 10.4% of government revenue, that would be the highest level of any high-income country since it started gathering the data in 1995. Fitch has the UK on negative outlook for possible downgrade. This is confirmation beyond question that our economy is doing badly. 10.4% of government spending is debt interest. NHS, 7 million people waiting, and that's not getting any less. It's one of his pledges, isn't it? He's going to get it down. Surging ill health, the mental ill health that's going to follow the next year or two, with all these people getting into money trouble and losing their houses and so on. It's going to be something else, I think. Our life expectancy is down. We don't live so long now. I mean, I think that must be unique. I don't think that would have ever happened in the last since the last war, that life expectancy should actually fall. We've got record numbers of homeless children. We've got lorries stacking on the M20 right now, and the reason is because they don't want the hassle with tourists being held up, because that brings a lot of bad publicity. So lorries are being stacked. I was reading on Twitter today extracts from a Polish website about Polish lorries coming to the UK, and they say that they just don't want to come in anymore. They said they end up waiting, and there are no toilets and there are no facilities, and fewer and fewer are going to come here. You know, I've said so many times before about food shortages, but it's going to get so bad because they're just not going to come, especially if as a result of the fires, the food production has been diminished. And there's the Erasmus scheme, isn't there? You know, Erasmus, this is where students at universities in the UK, previously when we were part of the EU, they could go and study in a European university for a whole year, no extra charge. It was a fantastic, one of my sons did it, he went to Amsterdam. It was a fantastic opportunity to go and experience living in another country for a year. And of course, when we left the EU, we said we don't want to do that. We set up our own. Ours, I think, is going to be called a Turing system instead of the Erasmus. But ours won't involve any European countries. No, ours will involve people like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, places like that. And so, whereas, for example, with my son, he was in Amsterdam. You know, he could get a Ryanair £50 return flight back for half term or for Easter or for whatever. You can't do that from New Zealand. I mean, I don't think the Turing scheme is up and running anyway. But listen, what about this as a sort of a humiliation? The Irish government is going to pay for Northern Ireland students to continue to be part of Erasmus. Amazing, isn't it? I read also, just some of the things that I've noticed this week, that Belgian, Dutch and Scandinavian people are buying up at really low prices houses that were holiday homes of people in Spain, British people in Spain, who can't go there. You go for 90 days within any 180-day period, so their holiday homes are practically useless. So they're all being snapped up, and they're having to sell them off cheaply. British Gas. Wonderful news for them. Their profits are up 900%. Profits up from 98 million to 969 million. 6 months, that is. 6 months. They put the dividend up 33% because all foreigners earn it. And the boss, he gets of Centrica, that owns British Gas, he earns 4.5 million a year. He isn't worried about any recession. Now, the week before last, I made a video in which I talked about global warming. I talked about the consequences, one of the consequences being that a lot of people are going to move from Africa to Europe. It was, funnily enough, the video that I had the least number of least number of viewers out of 120 odd videos. It was the lowest number of viewers. And I realised right away that nobody's interested in global warming, really. It's affecting us all. It's going to, chances will kill our children and grandchildren, but nobody's really interested. And I did notice today, actually, some figures that said that 21 of the 30 hottest days ever recorded were during this current month, July, and that July could be the hottest month for 120,000 years. And you only got to look at, all these fires, we've all seen it. And I wonder why people are not that bothered about it. I know a lot of people are passionately worried about it, but I think a lot of people are not that interested. And I think maybe it's something to do with the fact that if it doesn't happen to you, if you're not personally involved, if you're not flooded or your house roof isn't blown off, then you probably are. It's very sad and you feel sorry for other people. What's the next item on the news? And I think also with this global warming, I thought this last year when we had that day when it was 40 degrees and so on, we all know that in 2 months' time, and by October, it'll be back to normal. And so it's just happening too slowly, and yet it's happening so quickly, but it's happening slightly too slowly, really, for people to get that worried about it. And so we get situations like, our government, they're going to max out, as Shep said last week, going to max out the oil and gas from the North Sea. We've still got this coal mine going ahead. And, onshore wind farms are really a no because it takes forever to get planning permission. So everything is just sort of slowly one of these days. I know we're only one small country, maybe 2% of global emissions and so on, but it's by far the biggest far the biggest problem that's facing us all. But as I say, nobody's very interested, so I'm not going to talk any more about that. And so we look at all this, and incidentally, I will just say one last thing about global warming. That is that Lord Gormless, our former Brexit negotiator, almost certainly the stupidest man who has ever taken part in British politics at a national level. He gave a speech in the House of Lords last week about global warming, in which he told everyone that for Britain, to hell with the rest of the world, but for Britain it was going to be a good thing because more people die of cold than they die of the heat. So if everything warms up, less people will die of cold, which seemed to be on a scale of stupidity which is unheard of. But the big story, as I hinted previously, the big story this week has been Nigel Farage's bank account. Nigel Farage, the guy who really brought us Brexit. Without him, there would never have been Brexit. This guy who worked for 20 years in the EU, taking a huge salary, and is now on a big pension, I've no doubt, and ranted for years and years and years about how terrible the EU was and how we had to leave it, and who now says it was a failure. Leaving was a failure. He had his bank account shut. And the publicity, there have been thousands of acres of publicity, front pages on newspapers, top item on the news, day after day after day after day. This is one miserable little spiv, loudmouth, who's had an account closed. And the CEO of NatWest, who owned Coutts, had to resign. Admittedly, she spoke out of turn, but and I think somebody else is gone as well, haven't they? And God, it's just the fact that can be a big story. As I say, it's like living in a mad country. Just so much to complain about, so much going wrong, and so little chance of things being turned around. And this is not even to mention things like Dido Harding and her £37 billion budget for test and trace. We're told she only spent 20,000 million pounds she spent. Can you imagine how far that would go amongst hungry children, people who are depending on food banks? 20,000 million pounds. The Public Accounts Committee said it was a complete waste of money. Dido Harding said, well, you should never expect it to work on its own. Look at the PPE. Billions and billions in PPE. There's a field down in Kent somewhere, apparently, with hundreds, maybe thousands of containers of PPE which will never be used. Gradually it'll be incinerated. Nobody's being chased for it. Nobody. You see a bit on Twitter about Michel Mone from time to time. All these people who all got these contracts didn't know anything about PPE. They got these contracts because of some connection with a government minister. Look at Truss and Kwarteng. It turns out now, it's been revealed this week, that Kwarteng was warned by the OBR before he announced his budget, the one that cost us 74 billion apparently. He was warned before that it would be extremely damaging, but he went ahead with it anyway. He's disappeared. And then there's our favourite, isn't there, the Home Secretary. Just this woman is evil. This woman is just beyond adjectives. She refused to give pregnant asylum seekers and asylum seekers with babies £3 a week. She refused to give them even that, the basic £3 a week. What can you do with £3 a week anyway? But she wanted to deny them that, and the court found that she was that she was obliged to do so. That she was guilty of failing to pay this money. Later on, another court found that she was committing an offence in insisting that children were were housed in hotels as opposed to care centres. The prison ship is almost ready, haven't we? They're going to start loading it soon. Apparently the concerns about fire safety and so on. Frankly, if I were one of those guests on or inmate on that prison ship, I'd be very tempted to set it on fire. 154 children have gone missing under her watch. There were two incidents last week which are worth mentioning. There's a guy who came to the UK as a child when he was about 14, I think, with his father. His father is a nurse. He came to the UK from South Africa, and he got married, had a child, and so on. And in 2018, the police stopped him. They found he got some cannabis in his car, and that he was arrested and taken to the police station, and everybody sort of agreed that he would only get a rap over the knuckles, he'd get a probation or something. And so he just said, yes, I'm guilty, I've got something, I was going to sell it, and so on. And because he was black, he got 9 months, served 4.5 months. Now, he'd never offended before, and he's never offended since, and the Home Office have said he's unlikely ever to offend again. But the unfortunate thing was also he'd never actually... he'd got indefinite right to remain, but he never claimed British citizenship. Now he's split with his partner, but he's looking after his son. And anyway, his son who's 6 years old, and he went on holiday to South Africa with him. And on the way back, they had to go via Turkey. When he got to Turkey to get on the plane, they said he couldn't go because he was undesirable. He was banned from the UK. So the son had to come back. This guy is a lorry driver, he's got a job, he's got a house and all the rest of it, and family in the UK, and he's got the boy who's dependent upon him. And they said no. So this guy for I think 6 months has been wandering around Turkey. He would depend upon charity from people who are kind to him. And eventually it was Braverman who was asked to make a decision on this case, and she said no, you can't come back. And you think, you know, what sort of person could actually make that decision? But it gives you an idea of what sort of person she is, and what sort of a society she's creating, and what sort of a nasty police state she wants, and how she wants to be an authoritarian, and how she's enjoying being cruel. I think she, and I think also Generic as well, they actually enjoy their cruelty, and it suits that wimp Sunak very well, because there are lots and lots of people who will get votes from if we're nasty to immigrants or asylum seekers. There was another scene last week, you might have seen the film of it, and there was a young woman, black, in South London somewhere, and she was at a bus stop, and she was being arrested by 4 burly policemen, and they were trying to put her in handcuffs. Now, beside her was her child, who was 5 years old, who was completely traumatised by this, was crying, and he was being sort of guarded by a policewoman. And this woman was screaming. She was resisting being handcuffed. But nonetheless, they got the handcuffs in there, and they were really treating her very toughly. And the reason these 4 policemen were arresting this woman and putting her in handcuffs were because they suspected, they had no proof, they suspected she may not have paid her bus fare. In fact, it turned out afterwards she had paid her bus fare. And that's what happens when you say to the police, look, you can arrest anybody for any reason, you don't need any justification, just if you think they might have done something wrong, you can arrest them. And I just thought how absolutely disgusting that was, and how it's such a sign of what happens when you give, the Home Office to some crazy psychopath who just takes joy in making other people's lives more miserable and in exerting her miserable authority. But anyway, there it is. Something else that did also cross my mind last week was this, that I went to my local Sainsbury's. I'm not a big fan of Sainsbury's. The brown and orange colour puts me off, frankly. It's always a bit drab, I think. But anyway, by the by, I mean, there's always been a perfectly good supermarket in the past, and like any other, normally it would have been full of everything you want to buy. Anyway, I went on an afternoon one day last week. It wasn't like it was 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. It was midweek. And in the fruit and vegetable department, you know, they have all those plastic square boxes, and lots of them were empty, lots of them were half full. The vegetables were all a bit saggy and a bit sorry for themselves, and a lot of them looked as though that if they weren't sold that day, they're going to be thrown away the next day. It all looked very miserable, and, as I say, very poor and shabby. And I went to the bread department. That was all just a muddle and a mess, and stuff here and stuff there, and a few pink iced cakes in those little plastic wrappers and things. The whole place just looked shabby. It had occurred to me, we're living in a poor country now. You know, we are getting poorer and poorer. The quality of life is disappearing. And I couldn't help thinking back to all those supermarkets, the hundreds of supermarkets I've visited over the years in France and in Italy and Germany and Spain and so on, and how they're always absolutely full with fresh fruit and vegetables. Everything is fresh. And there's huge selections in the bakery, and the cheese selections and the meats, and all that's going. And ours is going to get smaller and smaller, our selections, because fewer and fewer Europeans are going to want to supply us. I thought just all of this is because we wanted to take back control, of our borders. It's really, really so sad. But anyway, that's what I think about it. And so if you've watched this far, thank you very much indeed. If you haven't already subscribed, if you wouldn't mind doing so, or if you know someone you think might be interested. But I do have one last thing I want to show you. I haven't sold any merchandise in the past. I have my little book, which I still have a few copies left of. That's this one here, which only goes up to when Truss became Prime Minister, or just before. Nonetheless, it's going to be worth a fortune in 100 years' time. This will be worth no end of money, because it's a light-hearted history of Brexit. But I have decided to produce some hats. They are slightly summary hats, but there is going to be I think a demonstration. I think in September, a big pro-Brexit, pro-EU demonstration. This may be perfect, these hats. So I'm going to demonstrate them for you. There are four options, and if you're interested, I don't have any at the moment, but I do need to order them. If you're interested, if you wouldn't mind just putting a note in the comments, I'd appreciate it, and tell me which version you prefer. So this is number one. This is the Farage tribute hat. This is number two. This is number three. Bit more to the point. And my favourite by far is this one. So if you think you might be interested in 2 or 3 weeks' time buying any one of those hats, I'd be grateful if you let me know. They won't be very expensive, but anyway, if you've watched this far again, thank you very much, and until next week, bye for now.